You're all very welcome to this event run by the journal.ie, and it's with great pleasure that I can introduce our speakers today. But just first, I'd like to just mention that this event is part of the Good Information Project, and the initiative itself is to help the public acquire the critical skills to recognise good information and avoid bad information. So each month the project focuses on a different issue, and this month, the last month, which is the final topic, focuses on our place in Europe. So we'll be looking at the advantages, the opportunities, as well as some of the concerns and the questions it raises. So this afternoon we're joined by expert panellists and a live audience, and from the Pálás cinema in Galway. So we'll be here discussing can young Irish people thrive as citizens of Europe? So with that, I'd also like to mention that my goal today is to make sure we're walking out of here a little bit more informed and also connected to EU as citizens. And yeah, I'd like to also introduce myself. My name is Emmy Coffey Nguyen. I'm the National Citizen Representative for Youth for the Conference on the Future of Europe. Bit of a tall title, but it's great to be here, and I'll be your host for today's event. So we'll hear from our panel and then move on to our audience for a Q&A. So I'd like to maybe ask you, if you do have any questions, to maybe hold them till the end. And if you're curious, need clarification or at all disagree with anything that's also being said today, please do. We want to hear from you at the end. So I'd like to then just move on to introducing our panellists, and thank in particular our members of the European Parliament who've taken out some special time out of their day on a Monday before they go out to Brussels. So thank you so much for being here. So Maria, I'll just start off with you. So you're a Fine Gael MEP for Midlands North West since 2019, sitting as a member on the European Parliament Committee on Employment and Social Affairs, Culture and Education, as well as the Delegation for Relations with the United States. You're currently leading the first file in the Parliament dedicated to mental health in the digital working world. And you're also campaigning for 2023 to be the EU Year of Mental Health, which is really interesting. So we'll hear about that in a sec. And you're also the VP for the LGBTI Plus Bureau, and you see your work as aligning with women's rights and tackling gender-based violence, particularly online. So thank you for being here. Big boulabus. And then beside Maria, we have, of course, Chris MacManus. Chris, thanks for being here. You're an MEP for Sinn Féin for Midlands North West also. And you've been an MEP since 2020, I believe. And you were previously a long-standing councillor for Sligo Borough and Sligo Strathill.
County Council.
Yeah, County Council. And in the European Parliament, you've got a particular focus on securing a fair deal for family farmers and rural communities, and then also we've got to focus on sustainable forestry strategy, and then also protecting the economies of border communities post-Brexit. So an awful lot of work that you're doing there. And I know there's a few other things that you do that I've probably left out, but we're also joined here by Ciarán O'Driscoll from the European Movement Ireland. So thanks for being here, Ciarán. Ciarán is a researcher and policy advisor with EMI, and is really focused on policy and tracking and research. So very, very different. I haven't heard that before. So your academics, though, have focused on policy process and then in particular common fisheries policy. So we might just jump to that when we start talking about sovereignty and whatnot. So thank you so much for being here. So there are the intros. I really feel like I've accomplished nothing when I hear all that. So I just want to first set the scene and really talk about how the EU works, but we might just pan over to the MEPs for a second, because you've both got very important roles in the European Parliament. So I'd love to hear more about each of you and what your responsibilities are as MEPs, and like what are your expectations of the job, and is it really supporting Irish citizens, especially young people, at EU level? So Maria, if we could start with you.
That's okay. A couple of huge questions for a Monday afternoon, but delighted. First and foremost, delighted to be here and delighted to
speak to one of our many youth appointed coordinators and voices, and I'm so glad to see so many young voices in the audience. From a day-to-day operation side, for me personally, I split myself into almost like 2 weeks into 1 week. I don't know if Chris agrees. So you do your Brussels trip typically Monday to Wednesday night, sometimes Thursday, and then Thursday to Sunday across our very big constituency of 13 counties. So we cover Galway, Donegal, Mayo, across to Louth. 13 MEPs in total cover Ireland, but we're specifically based in Midlands Northwest. And then from a committee standpoint, as someone who didn't grow up in party politics, who didn't grow up discussing policy or legislation with my mates or around the kitchen table, I did grow up in community. So volunteerism, from church gate collections to sweeping community centres to teas and coffees at parent-teacher meetings. Yes, I was one of those students. Anything to kind of get out of the academic work and more be around people was kind of my DNA, and that's what I grew up in. So when I got involved in politics, in particular decided to run for the European Parliament, it was around looking at rural versus urban, and then across our constituency there's multiples of everything. You know, I'm from 30 minutes away from where I'm sitting here in a rural community called Shrule, very cosmopolitan area, and then you have this big urban area of Galway City and its growing population. So for me then, committee-wise, it was really important that I looked at employment and social affairs and how that works. So that's one of my main committees. Around culture and education was really important in terms of looking at access to this, what we're going to discuss today, the European Union in all its glory and all its learns and strengths, but also how many avenues are left out or how many roads are left out for some people, in particular student body, if they didn't go to a highbrow academic, college down the road here, but they might have done a PLC like I did in GTI. Well, why isn't the same opportunities offered to both? So that's why Culture and Education Committee is super important to me. And then I sit on as a substitute. So sometimes I have voting rights. That's what the substitute is. I'm a full voting member on both culture and education and employment, and I'm a substitute on home affairs and justice. And here we look and discuss everything from LGBTI rights within the European Union as well as outside, migration in all its forms, the increase of human trafficking that we have over the last number of years, particularly in this country, as well as cyber violence, and it's like a big bowl of stew. Everything is fit into that. And then you mentioned very kindly vice chair of LGBTI, as well as 2 mental health organisations that we have. And then you sit on certain delegations to countries, so USA as well as Africa is mine. So in the course of the week, there's times where you could cover all of those, right, Chris? And there's some where it might just be a main focus. So come the ending of this, I'll be back on committee listening an ear and then making my way out there. So I hope I covered kind of everything. It's kind of hard to fit it into one point.
Absolutely.
Pretty incredible. How'd you follow that, Chris?
Well, and I need to put a little bit of context because you said at the outset that I started in 2020. So
Yeah.
Maria chose to run the election. I'm very much an accidental MEP. Literally what happened was after the general election in 2020, our MEP got elected, or our Sinn Féin MEP, Matt Carty, got elected to the Dáil. And I became an MEP the very first week of the pandemic. So I literally flew out to Brussels on a Monday, signed in and became an MEP on a Tuesday. On a Wednesday, we got an email from the Parliament President saying, go home. And on Thursday, I flew home. So like for the first 6 months of an MEP, I had really no sense of it at all. And even now, only because we're beginning to reopen again, you're getting a feel for the proper rhythm of the role as an MEP. And you try and do what you can, where you can, but it's only now. And really, we've a kind of a 4-week cycle. The first week, and if you take it from the ground up, and to me, probably the most important level is we have a constituency week, which is where we come back and obviously engage with constituents throughout the constituency or groups or whoever wants to meet us. And it is as Maria says, it's 13 counties in size, which makes it quite cumbersome. And we're quite unique in comparison to other EU states, because most MEPs are elected on a list system, which you find, and we say, oh, and I'm going back because I have to go travelling around the constituency, they look at you kind of a bit like you're a little bit strange because they don't do it. Their party picks them. So like if you're in the CDU in Germany, and they get 20 MEPs elected. It's the first 20 on the list. So they kind of have more focus, their MEPs, you know, they'll be putting in people who've got, you know, specialists kind of like maybe on economics or agri stuff. So quite an awful lot of the MEPs are less constituency inclined than what we would be. So you have a constituency week, and then you have a group week, which every one of us belongs to a different political group. I'm on the left, Maria's with the EPP, formerly the Christian Democrats. So you will engage with your group, look at policy priorities, look at what you think is important for the group. And then you have a committee week, and obviously that's, you're getting into the legislative end of the work. And it's important because what you're hearing on the ground, what your constituents are telling you, you're then bringing to your political group and saying this is what needs to inform our policy. And then you're informing your committee, your MEPs are on committees. So they're bringing that kind of level of information up through and into the committee. And that's where probably an awful lot of the heavy lifting is done. Because quite often what comes at us in the final week, the Strasbourg week, the crazy week, and it's just on a public finance level and now on an environmental level, going 3 days a week down to Strasbourg is just a debate in itself. But unfortunately, it is what it is. So you bring all that committee work, eventually ends up, and we vote on it in the final week in Strasbourg. So, yeah, it's a massive amount to juggle. I came from a local government background where literally you do everything yourself. You know, you engage, you know, you walk down the street, you're engaging with people. You know, you write your own wee press release, you draft your own motions, you do all that counts work. You're literally your own little wee organisational unit. And then you go to this whole different construct. For me, was quite a culture shock. Yeah, but it's enjoyable. There are some days where you really feel you don't know if you're making headway. And there are other days then when you really see something. You see, you have when you're a councillor that immediacy of doing something for somebody. And then you don't have that in Europe, but you have the realisation you're helping craft policy for nearly 500 million people. So that in itself makes you feel you're doing something positive when you see something that you're pushing eventually comes in front of plenary and hopefully gets voted on. But no 2 days are the same. And as Maria says, you become an expert in Skyscanner. How to get from A to B.
So
in
we
the
should
best
really
way
be coming to
possible.
MEPs for
I tell you want to know where the best bathroom is in any airport in Europe, or where to fill your water bottle? Like you're probably looking at the best two experts here.
It's absolutely.
It's intense.
Yeah, it's very intense.
But just on that though, like, so you make a really good point about you know, having to travel back and forth all the time. That's an awful lot to do for a representative of Irish people at the EU. Do you ever find that there's ever a disconnect, or it's less impactful because you're travelling so much? Do you hope for a restructure of how MEPs engage with Europe and then back to Ireland again?
I don't know how you feel. We were just chatting before this kicked off. It's just, you know, the learns that we have from that we all have from the pandemic is the fact that I would love to have more dedicated green weeks, so that it allow you to be in the constituency physically on a clean week. If that could increase, that's even better again. And using the world of technology to have that, to have that connector in. I mean, ultimately, our role in what we were elected or appointed to do was to sit and represent the voices of Midlands, North West and Europe. So I in Brussels in particular, in Strasbourg, so I appreciate that we physically have to be there. But there's ways that we can use technology, just like everybody here studies and works or has the option to work remotely. I wish we had that feasibility.
If you're an MEP in Germany or France, like, you're only a train ride down the road. You're a couple of hours. For the likes of me and Maria, for us to get back home, is 8 or 9 hours. It's effectively a working day loss. And I'm not having a whinge about this. You try and maximise, we'd be in airports banging on laptops, or you're in the car, trying to make as many phone calls as you possibly can to utilise your time well. But if you take it from the sense that, that could possibly be 2 days travel in a week, it is not a good use of our time. And I think the Parliament during the pandemic really quite quickly got its act together in terms of engaging that we could, do remote meetings and we could vote electronically from wherever you are. And I think the Parliament now is rolling back on that a bit, and they're saying that no, things have to be done in person. And I can understand it maybe in regards to things like voting and going to Strasbourg and voting on final legislation. But the technology's there now, and
well, this is the thing. That's what I find very interesting. It's like, should we not be innovating with the times?
Absolutely.
And also, I think it's, just as somebody who's been to the conference in Europe, it's a big place, and it's very easy to get lost. And like, I can't imagine traveling over there every couple of weeks.
Well,
it's tough.
To that point, though, too. I mean, and to the conversation we're having today. I mean, I would look at the nuts and bolts of today in the next couple of years in particular, but then when you look at 5-10 years time and we're looking at younger people and more, not just the political machines to get involved in politics, and to Chris's point, not just be elected based off a list system that we see other European countries do, then where is that work-life balance, and how do we make it a really attractive currency for people to come in and think of politics, be it as an advisor or a politician or a group advisor, or what Ciarán does in terms of EMI and that connected piece. Then we have to use technology and we have to use policy and politics to make sure that in 5-10 years time, that all the work that we're working on now is not lost, that younger people are not putting, or any person, I don't mean to be, I'm not trying to be an ageist here, but that people are not looking like I did in 2019 to say, hang on, armchair activism has to end, I have to get involved and do something to look at and end a certain issue. Then we need to make sure it's attractive to people to look at it as a career and not just as, something that, well, if it was a little bit easier, well, life would probably be a little bit easier if we had a standard job and volunteered on the side,
And Ciarán, so you're sitting on the periphery of all this action that's happening. I don't know if you travel as much as they do, but like, you've heard Maria and Chris talk about, the changes that have happened obviously through the pandemic and how they engage with citizens and at that parliamentary level. Historically, though, like the EU, like what does it mean to, well, not you specifically, but what should it mean to all of us, given, what you do?
I suppose with the EU, it's often, and there's many strands to it, be it with kind of policy process or, in terms of different policies that kind of come up. I think it should try and, be as much as it can to whoever's listening in. So maybe you want to chime in about, data protection, or maybe it's about, fisheries policy, or it's maybe something else. So I think that's kind of where the EU sometimes falls down on, and is always, trying to communicate itself, and that's where EMI comes in. We're trying to always, bring people kind of closer to Europe to kind of understand what it does, and coming here today actually fits in with that very easily. So that's kind of the main kind of struggle that the EU sometimes does, is that it's, what is it? And in my mind, it's kind of these arenas of where decisions are made, where Europeans come together and they find solutions to different things, and the European Parliament's the best idea, that where there's actual, you can watch in live to it. But at the same time, it's trying to, where does the policy, and as was brought up there, where does the policy meet the local? And some of us are about these big policy processes or big issues, and it's kind of like, well, what does this mean to me in my local area and stuff like that? And it's often lost, maybe with through communication, or maybe and it's often the case that success when it comes to maybe certain policy issues are nationalised, where it's the green jerseys put on, and then if the failures come on, then it's Europeanised, and that's unfortunate when you see many, particularly now over the last number of years, particularly with COVID, how the EU, the vaccine strategy, or the EU support for Ireland in terms of Brexit, and today being another day where Brexit will loom large in terms of the news. So there's good there, but coming from family background in West Cork with the fishing industry, the EU is not seen in a good.
It's not so kind.
No, it's not, and it's very negative, and it's kind of the EU seen there at its worst, where it's the bigger member states having more influence over the smaller guy, when in actual fact it's it's much more broader. It's that kind of that compromise, and sometimes the compromise, particularly with fisheries, isn't always in the best interests, particularly for somewhere like Ireland and its industry over the decades. So that's kind of where it is. It does a lot, but it's the communication. It's kind of what's the local bit that's mattering to me, because I think that's where people tune in, where it's like, this impacts me directly. So one of our I think most viewed events last year that we had online was in early March to do around the EU vaccine strategy, because people are like, when is this? I want this in my arm immediately. While normally you could talk about, Fit for 55, the environmental programme from the European Commission, and like that sometimes is a little bit harder to get people engaged with that. So
there's a lot to communicate, in other words.
It's a lot to communicate, and that's there's a whole other process there with that, or a whole other debate around that.
And this kind of brings me into kind of the next section of today's event, which is really about the issues. And so we have a few to go through, but just if we talk about the youth's voice in the EU. Now, I'm 30, so I'm barely hanging on to you.
I'm 35, I think I'm gone.
There's a lot more younger people here, I can tell. But I was in Strasbourg in April, and this was for the conference on the future of Europe. And from your perspective, like we're at the tail end of that now, it's finished. Like, what was the input from young people, from your perspective, and was there enough of a voice there? Was it heard? I'd love to hear, from a policy and a more analysis point of view, like what would you say around that?
Well, I was delighted that European Movement Ireland were one of the main organisations in Ireland that were involved in kind of getting people together and kind of hearing their opinions for the Conference on the Future of Europe. And we did have individual panels to do with with the youth in Ireland. And the big thing that came across it was interesting within that panel and others that we had was the environment was the big thing, where people were really passionate about wanting the EU to kind of do more, to kind of cajole Ireland and other member states into kind of meeting their targets. And the big thing as well that came from it was as well it came across time and time again was the EU's role in kind of facilitating opportunities through education. So people are like, in terms of the Erasmus Plus program, why can't this be like everywhere in terms of helping people, where you got I went to many years ago in 2007 I went to Charles University in Prague in the Czech Republic for a semester, and I loved it, and it was we got a grant for it, and we were able to kind of study different courses that maybe I didn't have access to back in the University of Limerick, where I was studying at the time. And people people want that kind of copied and pasted into other areas where the EU can help, where can it, and particularly and it's broader now. So the Erasmus Plus program is no longer just kind of with students. It's in terms of traineeships, or maybe can we get it to apprenticeships, and make it bigger and better, because it's 35 years. This year, as well as me, so I share a lovely anniversary with the new policy area, and it's something. There's a success story there that when people hear about it, it's kind of, well, why can't this be put across in other areas? So it was interesting hearing that in the conference on the future of Europe, when we had our panels, that it was kind of the role of the EU to kind of help people do more, be it through kind of the environment or through like the Erasmus Plus program, because the structures are there, and it's kind of to like roll them out more.
Yeah, well, a few years ago, I don't even know what year. The fact that you could even tell what year it was, which is amazing stuff. But I went to Brussels, and I was on an Erasmus Plus program, and it was fantastic. Like, it was one of those moments in your life where you'll always remember, and you meet just people, and they become they're strangers, and they become friends for life.
Very true.
So I think it's an amazing initiative, and we should continue that. But one of the things, Maria, I'm going to shoot over to you now, is COVID-19 has caused or exacerbated huge problems with mental health. And personally speaking, the fact that I can even talk about it myself, I personally struggled a bit. But what I found really interesting with you is you're calling for the EU to make 2023 the year for mental health. Could you talk us through what you're trying to achieve, and like what benefits that would bring to citizens, but particularly Irish young people?
Yeah, of course, and thanks for sharing. I think when we start putting language around the emotion or the lack of support that we might have in any form of community, be it within our own family structure or school or work structure, then I think it's super important that we just talk about mental health and wellness. We all have it. We all have different strands of it. How it was explained to me by mental health professionals is, you'd have mental wellness, mental health, and in all its forms, so mental ill health, and then you have the further extension of mental health. And at any point over the course of a day, even we could move through all three of them. For me, a huge part of why I even ran was the fact that mental health and wellness is not communicated or talked about, or we as a country have a very negative legacy piece that we need to at some point address. We can't keep shoving it under a carpet. From a very small area where I come from, we've lost many lives of all ages and genders and orientation. So it's a case of, it doesn't see borders. It doesn't see whether you're male or female or other or any form of the rainbow community. It doesn't see any of that. So that was a huge part of what my 2019 campaign was, and calling for a European year dedicated to mental health. Land in first day of school in the European Parliament and get told, well, it's not seen as a competency of the European Union. I was like, well, that's not great. But everything is seen as a competency, really. It's just, we talk about physical health, we talk about economic value. And that for me is probably one of the greatest disconnects that we have with the European Union. They look at the economics of it, and I get it. The cash flow helps us get from A to B, but it's also people and the communities that drive that. That in order to get that. So I look at the like of the Health and Safety Directive that came in a number of years ago, and that making sure slippery signs are out and that everybody's working X period of time and you're not overworking. But why can't we extend that beyond to also include mental health of a worker and an employer? And for me, in all its facets, looking at this EU year dedicated to mental health, it is making sure that our policies are cross-sectional. So everything that Chris is doing in Agri Committee, we all should be doing in employment, and it also should be across any type of committee that we have coming out. And this also goes for any of the relationships we have transnational in terms of the EU or in terms of US or Africa or further afield. So again, as I said, cross-sectional. Unfortunately, not all EU years are attached to policy or funding. So when I call for an EU year, of course, I'm asking for an empty checkbook that will help.
Zeros.
That will help. Yeah. But to be honest with you, I the more I'm learning about it on a daily basis, no X amount of pot of money is going to ensure that mental health is fixed. It helps. It helps that every young person or any person that's going to any third level has access to immediate support. That's a huge help. But I also think we need to look at education value too. There's a great pilot project in Finland a number of years ago, since the local governments have rolled it out, where they started teaching language at a very young age in primary school around the needs. How do I feel? A feeling is upon me, an emotion is upon me. If we had that transitional language, as I like to call it, from a younger age, in our school systems, in our work programs, in politics, I think we'd actually be a hell of a lot better adults to ourselves and then to our communities. So there's a number of different facets included in a EU year. Yes, money is one of them. Yes, policy is another. But it's also having spaces like this where we can openly talk about that, the fact that we have just come through something in history that is unsurmountable. And at some point, we have to lay the fact that none of us came out of this, I believe, without some aspect of our mental health being impacted. So if we don't do it now, then we've missed, we're at the crossroads and we've taken the wrong turn. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I don't want to be too pointed by something that you said, but you said competency. What do you mean by that Europe doesn't have the competency?
we get real comfortable by saying, and something actually Ciarán had mentioned earlier, it's seen as, well, that's a national member state to do.
So like your issue sort of thing.
Yeah,
it's
national
not
or
an EU.
local level. That's their workload. But yet we're okay to say, well, they could do this, this, and this, and this at EU level in terms of physical health. Okay. Well, actually, mental health is a part of the physical health, so therefore it should be also seen as a competency. Yeah. But that's probably one of the greatest difficulties I have as a young representative. It's like, well, it's not a candy store, or sweet shop, sorry. My Americanism is kicking in there. But you can't pick and choose, like you're at a pick and mix to say, well, I'll take this, this and this, and then we'll leave that to the national or local member state. Of course, there's best practices, and I understand not everybody, in particular my group, the EPP, wants everything to be a directive or a legislative act, and I get that. But we also have 27 member states who have experts in various fields, and therefore we should be sharing best practices. Like, we should be sharing the good information. Like, there's so many best practices at a business, local, community, education level. Again, that cross-sectional piece. So if we're not willing to do that in all its forms, including mental health, then we're not using solidarity in all its impact. Yeah.
And I think I think one of the important things about what Maria is proposing in terms of a dedicated year of mental health is just the fact of recognition and talking about it. And I think and I think we're in a better place than we were when I'd have been, and in the interest of transparency, all announced
We're
their
all being
age.
very transparent
All announced their age. I'm 49. Right. So literally 30 years ago, when I'd have been a teenager, to talk about mental health or suffering from depression or anything at all would have been not taboo, but you just were expected to deal with it and get on with it yourself. So the fact that we're actually in a place where we can talk about it and engage with it and try and deal with it in a positive way, I think is very important in itself. But the other thing is, and it is, as you asked, it's termed a national competence in terms of that its primary budget in dealing and engaging with citizens with mental health issues or to make sure they have positive mental health is set obviously at a national level. But an awful lot of the things that we do out in the European Parliament about, engaging with progressive social legislation to ensure there's no discrimination or, employment laws or things like that, they're all factors that are part of ensuring, hopefully get the right legislation, but ensuring that people have good mental health. So we do have a role. We may not be sitting on the budget that deals with mental health within Ireland, that primary budget, but we do have a role in terms of creating good legislation. So from that point of view, it's important, and what we should be doing is we should look at things constantly be mental health proofing legislation that we're doing. Like, for argument's sake, or not for argument's sake, but like we were like looking at the issues of in agri around young farmers and the pressures that they're under. And obviously that, they take on an awful lot of financial responsibility, and that leads to its own mental health pressures in themselves. So it feeds into an awful lot of what we do. So we have to kind of be, not just tokenistic about it, but we need to make a decision that we look at things through a mental health prism whenever we're looking at new legislation.
And, sorry, Ciarán, go ahead. I love how you've got some input as well.
I'm delighted you brought it up, because actually that was one of the recommendations that came up from speaking to people for the conference in the future of Europe. People, they want to see at the EU level issues of mental health factored in terms of legislation and policy. So it's not just stuff just coming from the MPs, it's coming from the bottom up. So it's just great to hear it.
No, and I wanted to kind of echo that. It's great to hear two MEPs actually talk really openly about it and really push for it, because I do think it's something that we're not isolated, country to country. It is an issue. It also, though, brings up another thing for me, which was a new phenomenon in terms of mental health and actually psychological disorders is eco-anxiety or climate anxiety. I've started noticing myself, maybe I have a little bit of it, but I thought it would be a disservice to not bring that up. And just in talking about that climate or eco-anxiety, it leads me to ask the question, are we doing enough? Is the EU recognising what the UN sees as a threat multiplier? So it's not just climate change and then there's all the other issues, it's climate and then there's all the issues, and it can affect how serious it can get. So are we doing enough in terms of climate at EU level? What do you think, Ciarán?
I expect, most people want more, I think, from that, and we've seen that kind of, time and again, the conference and stuff, that people do want the EU to be more engaged and kind of, I remember even hearing from people, individuals on the different panels, where they want the EU to kind of set the finish line and to be kind of pushing member states to kind of get there, because they often see maybe that when it comes to kind of national level and the local level, the environment kind of often slides, and there's that big worry now in terms of when you look at the cost cost of living crisis and everything else, that these people are more affected by the immediate things in terms of how much they have in their pocket at the end of the month. And often stuff with the environment gets kind of pushed down like that in terms of crises. So I think for most people, they want the EU to kind of do more to kind of set the targets and then push the member states together to be the enforcer of those kind of rules.
But do you think targets is really going to do the job, though? I know it's something to aim for, but realistically,
I always live in hope with these things.
I know, I am as well, but I have to ask the question.
Yeah. I suppose the only thing that gets them there in terms of the targets is like what's the penalty, like what's the fine is there, and this is where the journal and others in the media are there to be keeping checks and balances on member states in terms of is Ireland brought to the Court of Justice of the EU and there is a daily fine put on because we missed some target for some piece of legislation, which people often forget in terms of how legislation is made in the EU. It involves officials from the European Commission. It involves Irish and other MEPs, and then Irish officials and politicians in the Council of the EU making it. So these are things which Ireland has signed up to in terms of they've helped with the debate and the policy process formation. So I think when they're brought to in front of the Court of Justice and everything else, that those kind of fines and penalties are high enough that national media organisations take note and kind of highlight, well, Ireland isn't fulfilling its obligations here, and that does spur people, and that's where civil society comes in and everything else with that.
And Maria, what are your thoughts?
I think
as an MEP?
I think there's so much going on in terms of both individual, some company-wide, some community-wide, and then from a European perspective, some countries really kicking ass, and then there's others that are not. And it would be a disservice to me as a young voter as well as a young representative to say, we've got everything sorted, don't worry about it. That's not the case. There's certainly more cross-sectional work we could do. There's certainly more urgency that needs to happen. And I think there's a lot more individual learns that we can also be making too. I think there's certain industry that needs to also look at and become climate friendly. And I don't know if Chris shares the point, as a West of Ireland representative and someone from a small farm background, I think the narrative that is there that it's farmers' fault and farmers need to fix it is absolute SHIT. And excuse my front say, sorry, the journal. This is where my mic will suddenly disappear. But I think how we fix that is through more forums like this, and then as public representatives, and then with our community, that we actually start righting some of the wrongs that have been pointed. There's. But to your point, how can we get more? I think to your question with Ciarán earlier, or just now, I should say, does the sanctions and the agenda setting work? It does, because we see it in quotas with female politicians. So we see it. None of us want to participate in it, as in we don't want to comfortably say, well, that needs to be set in order for us to really step up. But if it works, then we got to try it. We see sanctions with Russia right now. Are they working at the speed we want them to? No, but you have to set them in order for us to move forth and bring people with us. For me, the urgency and the emergency that was declared both for climate as well as biodiversity needs to move at a faster pace. How we get there, though, is through investing in entrepreneurial and innovations that are going to do that. Offshore wind for sure, but we're not going to build stuff tomorrow either. So we need to make sure, when I talk about climate and biodiversity, I also have to understand, I'm a bit of a pragmatist, I guess, or a true centrist. If we're going to get to B, we have to get A to B comfortably and move people with us. And that doesn't happen overnight, unfortunately, but we need to still move, and we need to make sure in a year's time we haven't left half of Europe or half of Ireland across just because they didn't have the financial security to do that. That's where we as public reps, I feel, needs to step up.
Well, when I was in Strasbourg, I was in the plenary for climate, and I'm going to be very frank with you, I was kind of left aghast because the IPCC report came out. We've 30 months on the clock to radically reduce carbon emissions. And I'm looking around and there's all these amazing proposals, and I hope to God that they go through and they're looked at quite seriously. But it won't matter if we don't reduce those carbon emissions. So I do, like, I feel very concerned. And I don't know if any other young people later in the Q&A will raise that, but I find it interesting you raised the question around farmers, and I do find it is unfair to just take a part of society and just let's just blame them. Let's set in targets and quotas and things like that. It's already hard enough, but Chris, if I could just come to you then around, you talk about farming families and supporting them. How does that work then affect with, how does climate come into it? I'm sure that's also something they're quite anxious about.
Absolutely, and like, we represent primarily, the West of Ireland and Midlands, Northwest, but an awful lot of the farmers I'd engage with along the West Coast are relatively small farmers, some of them part-time farmers, and just some of them who are maybe full-time or just about keeping their heads above water. But there's a common misconception that somehow farming and big sections of the farming community are diametrically opposed to good environmental practice. They're not. I talk to quite a lot of them day in, day out. They see themselves as the custodians of the land, them and the foresters and other rural communities, and they want to do the best that they can. But they feel, and you see, it's obviously farming community is probably one of the best informed groups on this island regarding EU, because the fact that they are, cap funded and in terms of direct payments. So obviously they have a direct connect with what's going on out in Brussels. But they've seen cap funding reduced from the early 80s of about 2/3 of the whole EU budget down to around now just around 1/3 or just over slightly 1/3. So, and they feel then that they're being asked to do more for less at times. And that's the problem, you see, is we have to find that balance of ensuring that, we're making it as realistically amenable for them, that they can go out and do what they want, that they need to do in terms of, go out, work the land, protect the environment, but that we're not overburdening them with whole piles of targets, form filling, this, that, and the other is the kind of thing you would hear about. And that's a balance. It's also a balance for us out in Parliament. Last week should have been a really good week for environmental, engaging with environmental legislation. Some of the stuff around Fit for 55, which is about, climate neutrality by 2050 and reducing emissions by 55% come 2030. Some of it didn't get passed. And it's because things, and I'm not going to start making political points on this, right? It didn't get passed. A number of groups were unhappy with quite a lot of amendments. They felt watered down the legislation. So it's got pushed back to committee, which means, again, we're delaying much needed legislation. As you said, we have to get this in place as fast as possible and as quickly as possible. And for example, I was talking to a young person at the weekend, and they were saying, I was explaining to them I was coming down here, and they're saying, what's going to be us? And I says, I would assume climate change. And they said, raise the issue of the taxonomy. Now, I have to go out to vote, and I don't know if you vote on that. It's a committee tomorrow, in taxonomy. And this is where the Commission, and this is where it gets frustrating, the EU Commission have come back and said that gas and nuclear should be defined as clean energy. And that's despite their own experts telling them that it's not. And we have to vote on that. Now, the Parliament probably, by a substantial majority, are not in agreement with that. But it makes it very difficult because the Parliament isn't on its own in terms of making legislation. We're part of a kind of we're one leg of a three-legged stool between the Council, the Commission, who initiate legislation or draft it and put it in front of us and let us look at it. But they're coming back and saying, that gas and nuclear are green. And that is quite frustrating.
Well, just on that point, Chris, it would be the biggest case of greenwashing I've ever seen, where we look at companies and then the EU itself decides to greenwash, is incredible. And can I just say then, as Irish MEPs, like, are you talking to Maureen McGuinness about this?
Well, I raised it with her at a committee meeting, and whatever the advice that she's receiving is telling her to keep articulating that. Now, the Parliament is not going to support that position, I don't think. It's become before the Envy and the Econ Committee over the next number of days, as I said, and it'll probably be, when it goes back to Strasbourg, it'll be, kicked to touch. But again, you are just, it's like banging your head against a wall at times. This now has to go back all the way around full legislative circle again, and to that extent, it's.
And how long would that take then, once you've gone through those stages and you're back?
To cut in there, just from I'm still trying to figure out in terms of the transition fuel. How I said earlier, how do we get from A to B?
Yeah.
And there's not, wind farms aren't built tomorrow. So, in terms of either nuclear or hydrogen, how that plays out, I don't know how the plenary, or actually I don't know how it will come out of committee, because I don't sit on either, but we follow. Commissioner McGuinness, and we'll give her correct title there, is speaking, and I know working with a lot of delegations, French MEPs across the country one part, Germans in particular want another, smaller member states like Austria then plays its part, Finland will also come in. So it's not just Irish with an Irish commissioner, it's an EU 27 bloc in that sense. And the offerings in terms of transitions are not coming for other than hydrogen and nuclear, simply because we have some countries have the capabilities of it. I mean, if we're going to talk about greenwashing, we probably should have had these conversations 20, 30 years ago, and we didn't, and that's a letdown to everybody in this room or everybody watching, but we need to figure out a way again to get from A to B and do that in the most cleanest, most energy efficient, while also making sure companies and big manufacturers are moving as quickly as they can to get to the fact where we are carbon neutral and climate safe and biodiversity safe.
And the reason the taxonomy is important is because it guides public and private investment. And what happens is it's, certain member states have their own interests. So you will find that French MEPs from across the political spectrum, not all of them, but quite a sizable number in comparison to other countries, where you might be able to kind of say across political spectrum and have an idea of how people would view certain matters such as greenwashing, as you said, Emmy. But the likes of France, because of the big nuclear industry that's in it, would be, their MEPs are very much in favour of having nuclear included in the taxonomy. So it again goes back to this, constant balancing act in the European Union of member states, quite understandably, bringing their own national interests to the EU, rather than at times, do they need to be looking at things in an EU-wide context? So it's part of a larger, ongoing, slightly more abstract debate, but it's a constant.
And Chris, just to let you know, I think you're to leave in 10 minutes or so. I just want to let you know. But I want this next question is, and I could speak all day about climate, but thank you so much for your input on that. But we've established, right, so climate is definitely a security issue, but we've other things happening, obviously, with Ukraine, and then the current political instability with Northern Ireland, given the protocol. Chris, can you give us a sense of what's going on? How is it going to affect us as young people? Because this is huge, really, what's happening today with Boris Johnson and his government. It'd be laughable if it wasn't so serious. That somebody like Boris Johnson is sitting on the top of a pyramid that's determining and impacting us over here in Ireland. And if any of you can recall back to 2016, when the whole Brexit debate was going on, there was no reference to Ireland. No, it was an afterthought. And as has been historically an ongoing event, Ireland becomes collateral damage for sometimes historically for British interests, but very much so now for Tory interests. And as I said, the legislation is being published this afternoon. It's aimed at placating a very
narrow group of people, effectively people within the Tory party who are very English nationalist in outlook, and their concern is about their own political futures, you know. The first and most important thing to say is the protocol is working. You know, the economic data supports that. The North and indeed parts of the South are booming at this time. And economic data shows that the North is far outstripping Britain in regards to economic growth. I think only London in Britain is the only area that was showing a positive economic growth. So the protocol is working. And the protocol, yes, it has kinks. Yes, there are some problems with it. But the protocol is the only mechanism possible to ensure that post-Brexit that we don't have a hard border on the island of Ireland. And I'm old enough to remember when there was a border, a hard border on the island of Ireland. Obviously, we're still partitioned. You know, as an Irish Republican, I have a very specific viewpoint on that. I want to see my country united. But at this time, to ensure that the Good Friday Agreement remains safe and secure, the protocol is the only mechanism that's there in place. And it's been attacked, as I said, by the Tories, but also by the DUP. And the DUP have never supported the Good Friday Agreement. And they're now using the protocol, in my opinion, using the protocol as a proxy to attack the Good Friday Agreement. And as I said, the Good Friday Agreement, and anybody you talk to out in Europe, out in the European Parliament, the European Commission, any of the institutions, they get it. They recognise that the Good Friday Agreement, in their opinion, is sacrosanct, that it cannot be undermined in any way. So to that extent, what we're seeing now is, you know, who knows what the days and weeks ahead are going to bring to us. What's wrapped up in all this too is the Tory leadership competition. So the person who's engaging with Europe in terms of EU Commissioner Maroš Šefčovič is Liz Truss. And Liz Truss is somebody who has an eye on being the next Tory leader. And an awful lot of the permutations going on in her head in regards to those discussions around the protocol will be not about what's good for Ireland, they'll be very much about what's good that will get me the most number of MEPs to support me whenever a leadership contest comes along. And that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with people who don't care about what happens on the island of Ireland. Their only care is about their own personal political ambitions and their own political safety come the next election.
And how do you think Europe is going to respond to whatever the outcome is today?
Well, Europe has been very clear. The protocol is not for negotiation. They've said that from day one, from Ursula von der Leyen all the way down. Maroš Šefčovič has said it time and time again. They have, and he is the patience of a saint, Maroš Šefčovič, I have to say at this stage, dealing with the, you know, as I said, David Frost and then now Liz Truss, but basically dealing with and trying to, you know, handle the Tory infighting that's going on. And that's what he has to deal with and try and second guess that. But it's not for negotiation. There's a recognition, yes, there are problems, but we can fix those problems. The EU Commission have bent over backwards without breaking the rules, but going really, really far, have bent over backwards to try and address these issues. And like I said, is the protocol is working. You know, so to that extent, there's not going to be a renegotiation. The British are just going to have to find, and I'm exasperated at this stage, just going to have to, with them and their attitude, but are going to have to find some way of just recognising the political reality that they're going to have to make the protocol work.
I'm sorry, Chris, I'll probably have to stop you there because we've to get to one key thing before then we go to Q&A and then you have to run. So I did want to just come across to Ciarán, and sorry, it's a huge day. I don't think maybe we all fully realise it just yet, maybe until we get the news. But just from a very practical point of view, Ciarán, like, so you're coming from the European Movement Ireland, and as we look at the future of work for young people now, can you provide any like practical advice or tips about anybody trying to explore going over to EU institutions, and then maybe as MEPs, like, would you suggest running as an MEP in the future?
Well, I'm glad I can do a shameless plug for European Movement Ireland.
Yeah, of course.
For about 15 years now, we have been producing the Green Book, and it's available on our website, europeanmovement.ie, and it is wedged full of practical information about, what to do before you go, if you want to go to Brussels, in terms of aligning up your CV or Europass, or checking out what are the stagiaire programmes that are available across the institutions and beyond, and then tips for when you get to Brussels or wherever else in terms of whenever the EU institutions are based. And then, of course, we give other advice then about moving up the career ladder, and of course it's aimed at young graduates, so that's the key focus of it, and it's very important, particularly as we're just talking about Brexit, in kind of the post-Brexit world, where our kind of Ireland's footprint in the institutions or within Europe in general is important. And I think the Department of Foreign Affairs highlighted, I think between now and maybe the middle of this decade, I think there's about maybe 60 odd people will be leaving the institutions because they're retiring and everything else, and that's an important cohort of people who kind of are there involved in the policymaking process, can give insights and so on. And it's important for Ireland to maintain that footprint remains the same size or even grows, and so much so the Department of Foreign Affairs, they've launched a new kind of program to encourage people, and the best thing about it, there's like services and help to get people out there in terms of guidance and everything else, and that's one thing that we, European Movement Ireland, always try and do as well. We do outreach work. We had just, I believe last week, we had an online panel about kind of careers out in the EU, and it's able on Spotify, where we also have a podcast there as well. So we try and reach people and inform people as much as we can about this, because it is important, and it's this thing that kind of most of these people are in the background, but they're kind of they're not front and centre, but they're important nonetheless to do. So the Green Book, if I can direct you to that.
And we're going to come back to that. I do have a few questions for both of you, but just in just being sensitive to your time, it is 3 o'clock on the dot. Is there perhaps a question that anybody has for Chris? Now's your time to ask. If not,
Before I get on my plane.
Oh, sorry, we
vote on the taxonomy.
We do have a question. Yeah.
Hi. I just wanted to ask, I think a lot of young people will agree with me that we are treated often like citizens of tomorrow rather than citizens that are existing in the current day. When I say, is there any action plan to get young people involved, especially on issues of climate that will affect them in the years to come in the European Union?
Well, and I don't know if that's aimed directly at me. Maria wants to jump in. Directly, not that I'm aware of. I think you're right in regards to we need to find. I got involved politically when I was 16 or 17, but I think it's important that we find a way to ensure that young people are. And as I said, I'm conscious, even in my head, if I'm not, but I'm an older fella now, that we don't do it in a patronising manner, that we do it from a place of respect and of ensuring that, as a voter, and even people who are not voters yet, but that every voice is treated exactly equally, because I'm a believer in the proclamation and I believe firmly in equality. So we need to ensure that everybody gets engaged with it. Now, I know from being involved in a political party, it's becoming harder and harder, and this is across the political spectrum, for people to get involved in political parties, and I get that, because many more people are driven by causes specifically, and that's what motivates them. They're issue driven, like the issue of climate change. So people need to find the right place and platform for them to engage in that, but I'm not aware of there being any specific programme that is encouraging people. Now, obviously, as Ciarán said, the Conference on the Future of Europe engaged with young people in all 27 member states at varying levels. And I think the Conference on the Future of Europe is a good thing and should be a continual thing. It should be ongoing. It shouldn't be just, we done this for 12 months and we engaged with people and we've heard all their ideas, and that's great stuff. We have them all in now in a big binder and we're going to implement them all. It should be a continuous thing because we do have that ongoing problem of the EU being disconnected. And while I had, the Conference on the Future of Europe, as I said, I had, I'm not going to say issues with it, it was the fact that it was it tried to concertina a massive amount of stuff into a very short space of time. So I think that needs to be an ongoing process. But I do appeal to all people, regardless, become as politically aware as people can and engage with people who are decision makers. Too often we see apathy, too often we see people who are not going out to vote. And I get that. Sometimes people think politics is the same old, same old. But the reality is it's people who are in that elected position that actually get to make real change. And that means we need to feel that external pressure from groups, from individuals, telling us this is what we want done. This is what we need you to do if we're going to have a tomorrow. Because as I said, your voice should be now, not in terms of, as you said, in regards to being a voter of tomorrow. It's a here and now is what we're talking about.
Just if you don't mind, and I think you shared earlier you're part of Corla. Am I right? Okay. So Lergus is a great avenue in terms of events that they have linked into Conference on the Future of Europe, as well as this EU Year of Youth that we're in now. And further, to Chris's point, further extension of that is needed. We are also 2 years away from local and European elections, and hopefully a little bit longer to a general. And it's a two-way relationship. I think, and I can only give a personal lived experience. I was sitting in an armchair and I was getting so bloody frustrated that I'm like, this certain, and to Chris's point, issues like mental health, like equality, like LGBTQI rights, like the impact of young female farmers in particular that I have a keen interest in, that I realise, like, well, hang on a second, where are they meeting me? Well, it's actually, where am I meeting them in order for actually them to hear my voice and hear my vote? And I realise through the likes of Women for Election or Northwest 50/50 that there is amazing avenues to learn about politics in all its forms, figure out, to Chris's point, where my issues and where my politics could be and wants to be. And then, I think, again, to Chris's point, it's not becoming just about a political party. I think it's becoming very much like individuals, and who do you align with or who do you want to push in order to hear their voices more? Do you want to be a candidate? Or to Ciarán's green book?
Yep, the green book.
Thank you. Oh my God, I got so nervous there for a second that I got it wrong. There are so many opportunities to feed into politics. So where do you want and how do you want to access that? But it is a two-way street. You have 2 years, be it as a candidate or feeding and supporting a candidate on various issues. Forums like this, how many friends that you can bring. I'm going to tell you this, and this is the hard truth, and this is something that my team and I fight with all the time. If I could do youth events all day, every day, I would be there. Unfortunately, at some point though, like all political representatives across the political floor, you're going to have to start looking, right, well, where are people going to return on votes, and where am I going to see most interaction? And this is where young people fall short. And this is where also we fall short in providing podiums. So again, as I say, that two-way street. So we need to make sure there's so many people registered to vote. If they're not registered to vote, what can we do? Listening to you, voices of today, not tomorrow. Voices of today tell us, right, we need 1, 2, and 3 events held so that we can collect as many and get as many involved in the political landscape. And when I talk to schools, be it through the Blue Schools programme or the European Ambassador Schools programme, I'm not going in talking about Fine Gael or the EPP. I'm talking about what it is, social issues, political issues, environmental issues, and so on and so forth, that we need to have this conversation about in order to impact policy, impact change for today, not necessarily, well, it'll feed into tomorrow, but we need to hear today. But it has to be that two-way street. And I get so frustrated when I hear, well, they didn't come to me. Right, I get that. But it's hard to start the first date, but we got to start it. So we got to be in the same space in order for that to happen. And really open to any ideas or suggestions that you have. And I'll make sure it's not just fed into me, but it's also fed into, I know Chris has to run, but it's fed into all Irish representatives. But it is that two-way relationship.
One thing I can say is a lot of this stuff is very lacking on social media awareness. That's something that's really big that needs to change.
I think if you feed into, yeah.
Oh my God, sorry.
We just want to make sure,
the kind of relationship that older people and younger people can have through social media to create awareness on events and different issues, because the way the two generations are using it at the moment is so disjointed and disconnected that it rarely ever crosses over.
Yeah.
And that's a problem for Corla as well, because we have problems finding people, we have problems retaining people, whereas, you know, if you had a better social media presence, you'd be reaching more people.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that you have a
that
bad
hurts.
one, by the way. Sorry. It's
My team. I was like, God, I got one extra follower today. I feel great, but she's just after knocking me off my pedestal. No, I kid. I kid. No, but to your point, there's so many platforms, and I'm not gonna lie. I have a love-hate relationship with finding people to support me or have engagement with on the likes of Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, because it's gone so negative. And then sometimes as a public rep, I'm like, oh my God, like, am I doing everything wrong? Like, how do I break through that social dimension? So that's why I'm so delighted interface forums like this are happening more and more post-COVID. I do think, though, if I was a 17-year-old about to turn 18 and looking at voting and going online, you're not going to see always the truth in 280 characters of a tweet. And unfortunately, critical thought and thinking process, that's why, again, this forum is super important, but it is becoming less and less. And then as consumers, we want everything in 3 seconds. But as a centrist, pragmatist, trying to be a progressive MEP, I'm like, I can't get everything into 280 words of a tweet, or just on a 10-second reel, I should say, on Instagram. And that's why then I say about that two-way relationship. But I do hear you. Like, we have to provide as much info, factual info, and then just make sure people are coming to us who are looking at various forms for critical mass thought than just 1 or 2 people who are telling you, you know, this. I mean, we got to beat the algorithm somehow. And trying to get more and more people like yourself involved in politics. And I don't know if I completely miss off the part, but other than the fact that I'm going to go home and lick my wounds about not being as big on I thought I was decent on the
It's
ground.
pretty tough, though. Like, I mean, one of the reasons why I've probably tried to stay away from getting into politics is because I am terrified of the backlash of, you know, of course we're human, we're going to, you know, cause some problems for some people because of our decisions, or may not make the right decision all the time. So I hear you on that. I'm just conscious of time, and I just really want to make sure that if there's any questions that now's the time to raise your hand. So if you have one, please raise it. Yeah.
In terms of Ireland's representation in the EU, what are they doing to like push awareness towards like climate change and like housing and employment?
Great. Thank you. What's your first name?
Sarah.
Sarah. From a housing perspective, it's seen as that comfortable state of national competency. However, we're having a housing crisis across Europe, so more and more forums are coming and conversations are coming to the fore. You see a lot of, in terms of climate, in some ways, housing, and you said employment too, right? Employment. You see them across legislative. So a lot of the amendments, I can speak to my team and I work. So when it comes to our employment and social affairs committee, any amendment that we have, it's around equal access. It's around fair access to all that you shared. It's making sure those who have or are returning to work from mental illness or lack of equity and equality, that they have access to. My fundamental issue with what you're sharing there in terms of giving you a clean answer is the fact that it takes 3 to 5 years often for us to pass on a legislative piece and it come into national law. So in terms of employment piece, that feeds into housing and feeds into climate. One legislative directive that I just finished on, it's about to go into trialogues, about to go into further debate and discussion with the Commission, is around pay transparency, so equal pay for equal work. Right now there's about a 14% pay gap in some sectors for men and female, ignoring the fact that other also belongs in that because not everybody aligns to just one specific gender. So that 14% pay gap, that's about 50 additional days women will work in comparison to men. fighting tooth and nail to get that through. We got it passed, barely. Now we go into the commission to try and make sure that they adhere to what the Parliament has requested and demanded. But that could take, again, that 3 to 5 years to see that access in here. Whereas we have the likes of an Irish state body, Line to Farming, who just got called out on paying 140,000 of a fee because they paid 20,000 per year less to a female than to a male who was doing the exact same job. So it's happening today. And that's where the impact has to your question. It's like, well, why aren't we seeing it? And to the further question, why aren't we seeing it today when we need to impact that tomorrow and yesterday? But there is so many elements to it in terms of all that you've asked: legislative, non-directive, best shared practices that are happening on a daily basis in all committees. But I don't know if your secondary question then is, but how are we communicating that? That's through the likes of the Conference on the Future of Europe, and to Chris's point, the need to further extend that. That's also through making sure that we are communicating effectively, to the previous question, through use of technology like social media. That's actually making sure, coming out of the EU Year of Youth, that if there are 3 core instruments that you need to see change on, that we're actually impacting it, and again, communicating on that. But I don't know if Ciarán wants to come in on if I'm missing some big tranche of work that I'm meant to be doing that I'm not.
No, there's
not
always
to make
more.
light of your question, I mean it seriously, yeah.
But I think what Maria highlights is that issue with the issues that matter to people like that are housing, because it's impacting people directly. But it's often like that. It's the responsibility of member states, or competencies only rested member states. So the EU will have a very limited role there in terms of shaping that, which is where often when the EU does talk about things, it's things that are quite far away. I'm not too sure how they impact me and everything else. But what we did see in the conference is that particularly one of the kind of key things we saw was that people want the EU to kind of share best practices between member states. Not everyone's the same, and housing was something that did come up because they want to know, well, what's happening in the likes of Austria or maybe in Spain or somewhere else. Who's doing it the best, and how can we copy that to here? So that's what people would like the EU to do more of, and everything else. There was one actually point just to highlight for the previous question around, how are young people getting involved in the EU? And I can maybe do another shameless plug for.
Yeah, we've only a few more minutes, so just keep your questions. We'll come to them. But if you want to give your plug.
Yeah, it's on Thursday. We're hosting an event in Dublin City Hall with the European Youth Forum and the Committee of the Regions, who are putting together a EU chart on youth, and the main aim is to kind of where can young people's voices be directly inputted into the policy process with the EU. So it's happening on Thursday. More information on europeanmovement.ie. It's happening this Thursday. In
Noelle will love you.
Yeah.
That's the CEO of European Movement.
I'm not too sure about that at the moment.
Well, typically your events are quite remote, though, aren't they?
We do a lot that are online, but I'm not too sure if this at the moment if it's online or if it's
we'll
hybrid.
try and make sure we can share something along those lines for you. But I noticed there were a few questions. Do you want to ask a question? Is there a mic that we can?
Here, do you want me to
get over? Yeah. Thank you.
Well done, Josh.
My name is Scott, and I actually attend Presentation College, Headford, same as Maria. Well, she attended that. And I first of all wanted to say that, Maria was at an event called Hello Headford recently, and I was there also, and I thought it was really good to see an MEP interacting with their local community and circling back to where they come from and trying to communicate with the people that make up their communities. And I just wanted to make the point that I like to see people actually moving away from social media and really trying to establish a connection, which is often lost when social media is replaces that, but it doesn't really replace it as it should be, I suppose. But yeah, that was just the point I wanted to make, and I wanted to ask. So basically, in New Zealand, they are implementing this, in the process of implementing something that not just sees money as, I suppose, a form of currency, but they see nature as currency, and they see quality of life as currency. And you had pointed out earlier, Maria, that like when you brought up mental health to the European Union, they only really saw it as like people with better mental health work better, so therefore more money. And it's just like, is there any sort of movement towards evaluating things beyond money, that money is only one aspect of the richness of the European Union?
That's a
Powerful
great question.
Yeah, powerful
Very good
question. And great to see a fellow alumni of PCH. And I thought I was getting in trouble by not saying something at Hello Headford, so I was like, but actually to the point made earlier, I think I think Ireland, if you don't mind me also to shamefully plug, I actually think from a democracy standpoint, when you can walk up to an MEP or a public rep and there's no barrier and you can actually physically see them in your community, I think it's probably one of the most beautiful forms of democracy that not every member state in Europe and definitely not every country across the world holds. And I would hate to see us come to be a list system like other member states, which I can't ever see that happening, because the Irish representative and the Irish community, I can't see wanting that. They want to see us buying the local newspaper in the local store and making sure we're outside the square in Headford talking to our alumni of our secondary school. That's what's so beautiful and the rich about democracy, particularly in this country. That's a profound question in terms of your second one. But I actually think coming out of COVID, I think we are now in an employees market where a lot of the currency is being understood that we want a work-life balance. We want something that is, we can go and we can contribute, but we're also not needing 2 days to rest from the job that we've just spent 5 days or more working on. And it shouldn't be a vicious cycle. And I think what's great about where we're coming from now, it's not millennials being selfish and not wanting to work. It's actually they see what generations before them had to sacrifice. And at some point, mental health has become too much of a sacrifice. I don't know the end goal or a clean answer to your question, other than the fact that I think we're living in it now where employees or employers are the generations like yourselves that are coming up that are seeing the value of a person coming in fulfilled to work, but also enjoying themselves in their hard labour outside of work, and that we do not work to live, we are living to work, if I got that right. But I don't think we are there tomorrow, but I do think we're currently in that transition period. And I really value your point on social media and the fact that we need to see an everyday and a person and have that interconnection, particularly since COVID, because I don't know about you all, but you know, I got into politics to be around people and to help people, and the fact that was starved. I make always jokes of, you know, you're going to see so many politicians now post-COVID because we've been starved of photographs. But, you know, in many ways, we are humans. You know, our natural state is to be around people. And to have that, of course, is going to impact our mental health in elements of our physical health too because of that. But long story short, I don't know if you guys do work-life balance really, really well. I know some elements of the Green Party in politics. Some members of the Green Party are doing a 4-day work week so that their staff can have Fridays remote, but that's still work and you're still stuck to a screen. So I don't have a solve for you other than I'm super interested in if you have solves, and leave it to New Zealand and to Prime Minister Ardern to be ahead of the pulp. But again, that best practices is so important. You know, how we're seeing other countries do it. I know Spain is doing we're about to perhaps look at a pilot project of a 4-day work week to give staff, you know, in teams the 3 days, but a lot of the power is in the employee now, demanding that they want X amount. And I think that's a powerful movement that the turns are already in motion, which I'm really excited to see what comes from that. Sorry, Amy.
I can add very little to that because Marie said it so well, but I'd like that these kind of conversations are starting to to be had in terms of changing things. I think the problem with the EU for a very long time, it was kind of focused solely on the economic side of things, you know, how do we get more things going to make more money and everything else. So I think those kind of conversations around, or ideas around kind of, you know, valuing people's mental health and everything else, they're starting to filter in. And I think like you see things in Spain where there's, I think, pilot programs around menstrual leave for women, I think, for, so much per day or per month, which I think is like, why isn't this everywhere right now? So I think I would like to think we would like to get there, but hopefully like that with the environment or whatever else sooner rather than later.
Can I actually ask you a question, if that's okay? So when you brought that up, I thought it was really interesting because I've started looking at like GDP is more or less is how we measure progress, but it's economic progress, it's not human progress. So is that what you were trying to lean towards in some sort of way?
Yeah, like
and with climate, as in like making sure we put a value on it.
I am not an economist, but
No,
that's kind of
do away with GDP.
no, but absolutely, and seeing value in what really can't be like it's
yeah,
very, like
the intangible almost.
Yeah, exactly, and the beauty that we're surrounded by, and like I am a naturalist. I kind of actually condemn materialism and money and like even social media a bit. I would actually be inclined to move away from that, but that's just like obviously personal. That's very personal
but it's actually
to me.
very relevant. We're seeing a lot of conversations around that now. But
but absolutely,
great
so that all of that is very important to me, and how we approach our wealth, and actually how we view how wealthy we really are. Because we have plenty of money in our pockets, but we can be very unhappy, and I see that a lot. It's like it's been there since.
Can I just add, like from a GDP perspective, and I use this reference quite a bit because when I talk to certainly some more economic focused colleagues, 4% of the GDP gets spent on reactive care to mental health and illness, which I'm like, if we could actually half that and put it into preventative measures from an economic standpoint, just see, and in many ways you have, I've now gone over the bridge of understanding, okay, I have to meet someone, like the earlier point, I have to meet them where they are at in order for them to move with me. So it's a case of I use economic examples in order for people then to see, okay, hang on, she actually speaks a little bit of truth here when we talk about mental health and the impact it has, preventative care versus reactive care. But yeah,
it's really interesting. Like that's a whole other event. Journal.ie. We have time for 2 more questions. So, Josh, is it? Yeah.
Should we give Josh a question?
Okay, so is this working? Okay, no mind. But yeah, one thing that I wanted to brought up was like, I don't know, from my perspective anyway, across all levels of politics, like local, national, EU, there seems to be like a correlation between engagement in politics and like socioeconomic status and stuff. Like even like a result from the Brexit vote was like places like London, clearly they felt a greater value from the EU and like less affluent areas did not. And so I was like, my question is basically, how can we make our democracy more universally accessible? And then also, how can we make the EU more valuable to everyone, if that makes sense?
Where to begin there?
Yeah, profound questions. Yeah. And actually just goes to show you how more connected generations are to the European Union than probably what I, in speaking to other groups, feel.
That's a tough one, Josh.
I think it's incredibly important that we understand where we came from in order to understand where we want to go. And for me, I've never been asked exactly like you have asked it, Josh, but I've been asked it in other ways. And I often go back to, 50 years ago when we signed up to this project, the European Economic Community at the time, and shout out to all the women in the room, or those who identify as women. In order for us to sign up, the removal of the marriage bar had to happen 50 years ago. Like, can you imagine? And it was only in 1993 where we seen the decriminalisation of homosexuality, and we are now discussing more and more sexual reproductive health rights and equality versus equity, and the connect versus the disconnect. And fundamentally, that is the value of our European Union solidarity piece. There's a lot of things we don't get right in the European Union and in politics as a whole, nationally, locally, and European. But if you're not at the table, then nothing will ever change. And it's actually tomorrow's or the further day or the next generations that are going to have to clean up the mess that we should have cleaned up. Hence the reason why we're in this this greater struggle in terms of our climate and our biodiversity. But the value in the European Union is often really difficult because you only see it when things are being removed from you. So you see it with Ukraine and pro-democratic Russians, because we often forget, I think, them within that conversation. So you see when peace gets removed, you see it now in Northern Ireland when peace is up for grabs, and it's like a piece of paper that got ripped, and it's not seen as a value. You see it with our fishing communities that we didn't protect good enough decades ago. You now see it with our farming communities when money gets stripped. And then you have countries now, third countries, like the United Kingdom, who gets to play ping pong with something that we should be valuing all day, every day. And unfortunately, equality is hard fought and quickly lost, and that's where we are right now. And the value that we place on the European Union, to Ciarán's point earlier, is a good day is when the Irish government says, we got this. And then on a bad day, it's like, well, Europe took this away from us. And for too long, that's been happening. And this is where we ultimately lead. We have it where countries like Hungary and Poland are now doing the exact same narrative that the United Kingdom started playing a couple of years ago. You start seeing in other countries like Bulgaria, Czech, Croatia, in terms of equality, and then we get lost, and then we're only looking at the economics of it, and then that gets quickly rolled. A profound, I mean, all questions today have been profound, but for me, I've spoken to a woman who was a day away from leaving her job because she got married from Donegal, and her boss told her, don't hand in your papers for another 48 hours because something's happening in the European Economic Community. Wow. And because of that, she kept her job, and because of that, she got a pension. So when you see that, then you realise the value of the European Union. But we don't talk like that anymore. We only see the headlines of the nonsense that people want to say. And I have to say that as a political leader, that's some of my boys and girls that I play with. But we need to make sure that our politics is not seen, to your point earlier, as just one type of class. For me, the breakdown and the disconnect is community is not reflective in our politics, and vice versa. There's not enough LGBTQI community members, those with disabilities, those of different colour, creed, orientation, mother tongue. There's not enough of that in politics, and that's where the further disconnect. And in order to change that, we got to meet in the middle. We got to have a little dance, and we got to make sure people are coming and not leaving it to others to decide what we might look like, because you end up with male, pale and stale. And that's what we have right now, and that's what we need to change.
That was a really good answer to that question, by the way. So we do have one more question, but do you have something else to add to that? Actually, because I saw you were writing down some notes.
I was taking notes.
I wouldn't give him a chance to come in. I'm sorry. I was on a roll. Yeah.
I suppose with Ireland, in terms of, we look at kind of EU membership and kind of support for it. I think two factors mean, thankfully we're not like the UK, surprise, surprise. And I think two of those is that our politics is hyper-localised, so it is kind of, you want to see your MEP on your doorstep and everything else. But also, I suppose, our history shapes a lot of terms of how we look at politics in Ireland and engage with it. And we don't maybe, like some people perhaps in the UK might view that, things were better before the EU and maybe they can be better if we're out of it. And I think for Ireland that's not the case in terms of our history. And I think the size of us in terms of where we are, the EU is that kind of, I would like to think anyway that we recognise the EU as this kind of anchor and shelter for us in terms of the world. And there's a lot going on in the world now between COVID and Brexit and the war in Ukraine. So I think we value that more than maybe say in the likes of the UK, where it was like that. It was the abstract. It was just the common market. It was never it was very transactional. And for Ireland, it was a long time. It was how much money is the EU giving us, and that's all that matters. While when you look at kind of being in the EU got us all our COVID vaccines very well. I think. And for me, I think that common EU vaccine strategy for COVID, I think kind of had it been opposite, where it was everyone for themselves, it would, I think, have kind of undermined the EU publicly, because it was something that was impacting people directly. And if someone in like West Cork was seeing someone in Germany getting it months and months and months ahead of them, while it was all shared equally based on population and everyone was getting it at the same time, I think had it not been that case, I think it would have undermined the EU to a very significant way. So I'm glad that the EU was able to step in, and I like to think, and maybe with the Conference on the Future of Europe, there might be a referendum coming down the line at some stage. So these things will be fresh in people's minds, I think, rather than before.
And what I just take away from both your points is like there is power in solidarity, and we really have that with the EU. And it's, when we look at Brexit and what happened there, it's like, I know there's a lot of English people who are, are just upset that they're not part of that anymore. But I'm so sorry, we have one question. One more question before we finish up.
Is it
Do we have a mic?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. You're
sorry.
to my right, so I didn't see you. Apologies.
Sorry. I'm 38, so I don't know if I'm a young person anymore. But I kind of get it when I hear people saying that they have like climate anxiety, and just looking at the EU over the past few years. And you'd say that the European Green Deal is kind of what's the guiding principle of whatever's been done to address the climate crisis in Europe. And like a couple of things that Brussels have come up with since the European Green Deal, the CAP reform last year. I know there was, to look at it, I know Luke McFlanagan did a lot of good work on the convergence and increasing income for small farmers, but in terms of like incentivizing farmers towards farm sustainably, there wasn't a whole lot in it. Like there's these eco schemes which are kind of like they're taking away your CAP payments unless you participate in an eco scheme. And the other thing since the European Green Deal was published was the Repower Europe plan recently, which was kind of like, you're looking at it and it's just talking about building more LNG plants and like fossil fuel lock-in, hydrogen, like important hydrogen from African countries, like this kind of neo-colonial resource grab. When you say transition, I just think fossil fuel lock-in, and it just feels like the European Union is just facilitating this kind of constant push it until eventually, maybe they think we're going to be able to suck all the carbon out of the air eventually. I don't know, but I just wonder what you think about those things: the European Green Deal, CAP reform, and the Repower Europe plan.
Yeah. Can I ask, just in terms of what's your first name?
Connor.
Connor, thanks. Sorry, I think I missed it at the start. Can I just ask, in terms of the transition piece, what type of fuel or substance do you see getting us from over this transition phase?
You'd invest in renewables,
okay.
Away, there would be no new fossil fuel infrastructure being built.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. We shouldn't have it, but we don't have enough renewables quite yet in order for us to transition. So that's where I get caught a little bit as a young politician, to say, well, if we don't have enough renewables, then what are we going to transition people in from A to B? And I keep hating to use A to B, but 1 to 2 or whatever we need to do.
I think sometimes what's preventing us from moving from renewables is like just lobbying coming from the fossil fuel industry more than anything. Like,
that is true. I've heard. No, but it's because
it's true in some circles,
read,
but not in all.
not in all. No, I'm not
an
saying,
MEP, and I've never met a lobbyist group from a fossil fuel
I think
identity.
There was an article there recently, and Ursula von der Leyen has met with lobbyists. So we're not saying MEP strictly, but he does raise a good point.
It's well documented.
But
if you look at
generalised language doesn't help narrative, so that's why I'm just trying to understand specifically of like, okay, if hydrogen or any form of fossil fuels is something that you don't agree with, and I agree with you if we're actually going to be ambitious. Not actually, if we need to be ambitious, and we don't have renewables in place in order for us to get to the point we need to get to, then we need some form of something in order to substance to get us from across the line. In terms of eco schemes, I actually I didn't think we were ambitious enough in eco schemes. I do agree that some form of eco schemes to bring us to a better climate and biodiversity system needed to happen, as in they had to be offered in order for some farms, particularly larger farms, to to take what we're talking about here as urgent and not just as a second thought. But for me, I would have loved to see more investment and research done on hemp farming, which I don't think we're actually, Midlands Northwest is a prime position for hemp farming, and actually would facilitate a complete other industry in terms of our building sector, and down to a face cream or a CBD oil. And I think you see it in Pennsylvania, large farms being grown of hemp farming, and we're a perfect climate for it. But I would have loved to see more research and innovation for other pilot projects in the eco-scheme system. I also would have liked to see more eco-schemes driven towards women in farming, because they got lost in the shuffle. I thought there could have been more than just 5 or 6. It could have been 10 or 12, or opportunities for the likes of Teagasc to offer more, but there wasn't. But I believe we're back now in rounds before we do the finalised to the Commission, and they finally approve it. And then your third point, excuse my ignorance. I mean, similar to Conor, similar to what I shared earlier. I mean, I still don't understand, if we're not going to be able to build offshore farms to the speed we need to build them on, we do need to make sure people have something over the winter periods to be supported on. I think this conversation should have happened 20 years ago. It didn't. I think planning permission at local authority needs to be pushed through. I think investment needs to happen in renewables, and they get priority, versus just looking, to your point, at the dirty fuels. But I also understand we need to have that transition fuel, and I'm not seeing anything else coming up other than hydrogen or nuclear. I get lost a little bit between the two. Both are dirty as each other. But I was very anti LNG project coming in from North Kerry, because it was about frack gas. So if it's already banned here, we shouldn't be playing around with the future of it. I hope I come across your points.
Thanks, Conor, for your question. And I'm sorry that is actually the last question that we can handle at the moment. Sorry, we'll do another event just with you. Just with you. But no, just raise one last with the hemp farming. Huge potential in Ireland, and I'm so glad you mentioned it. So I'm glad that came up.
Yeah.
But
a lot of people see it and then just hear other words, or under industries, whereas actually there's huge scale for it.
One thing I noticed: Enterprise Ireland don't facilitate any investments towards companies who are in hemp. So that's something to really look into. Weird fact I had just there that came out of nowhere. But I'm so sorry. We've really come to the end of today. But I really want to thank you, Maria. My gosh, you're flying out the door probably now as well, like Chris. So thank you so much for being here. And Ciarán, thank you for coming all the way out west.
No problem.
For all your insights and advice as well.
No problem.
All the EMI plugs there.
Yes.
And I'd just like to thank you as well, the audience, because it's a Monday and we're in a cinema. So it's quite dark here during the day. But thank you so much for your questions. And I hope you're on the social media now, asking more questions. Tagging everybody here. And then I think the other thing is to say is please check out the Good Information Project on thejournal.ie, and you can email the team at goodinformation@thejournal.ie. And please leave your feedback, comments and suggestions. Keep tweeting, social media, all that, and tell us how the EU should be working for you, and have conversations with your friends at home, with your family. It's really important. So thank you so much, and safe home.
Thank you.